Well, the title of today's message is The Invisible Mom, and the title is stolen from a woman who wrote an article about 5 years ago that I just loved, and I would like to read this article to you as part of our message. She was just writing this on what it's like to be an invisible mom. It all began to make sense. The blank stares, the lack of response, the way the kids walk into the room while I'm on the phone and ask to be taken to the store. Inside I'm thinking, can't you see that I'm on the phone? Apparently not. No one can see if I'm on the phone, or cooking, or sweeping the floor, or even standing on my head in the corner, because no one can see me at all. I'm invisible. I'm the invisible mom. Some days I'm only a pair of hands. Can you fix this? Can you tie this? Can you open this? Someday I'm not even a pair of hands. I'm not sure I'm even a human being. I'm a clock. Mom, what time is it? Or sometimes I'm a satellite guide. What number is the Disney Channel? Sometimes I'm Uber. Right around 5:30, Mom. I'm certain there were hands that once held books and eyes that studied history, the mind that graduated summa cum laude, but now they had disappeared into peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, never to be seen again. She's going. She's going. She's gone. One night, a group of us were having dinner, celebrating the return of a friend from her European vacation. Janice had just gotten back from a fabulous trip, and she was going on and on about the hotel she stayed in. I was sitting there looking around at the others, all put together so well. It was hard not to compare and feel sorry for myself. I was feeling pretty pathetic when Janice turned to me with a beautifully wrapped package and said, "I brought you this." It was a book on the great cathedrals of Europe. I wasn't exactly sure why she'd given me this book to read until I read the inscription in the front leaf. To Charlotte, with admiration for the greatness of what you are building when no one sees. In the days ahead, I would devour that book. And I would discover what would become for me 4 life-changing truths after which I could pattern my work. Number 1, no one can say who built those great cathedrals anymore. There's no record of their names. Number 2, these builders gave their whole lives for a work they would never see finished. Number 3, they made sacrifices and expected no credit. Number 4, the passion of their building was fueled by their faith that the eyes of God saw everything. A legendary story told of a rich man who went to a cathedral that was being built, and he saw a workman carving a small little bird up in the rafters that was going to be covered by the ceiling. The rich man was puzzled and asked the man, "Why are you spending so much time carving that little bird into that beam that will be covered by the roof? No one will ever see it." And the workman replied, "God will." I closed the book feeling the missing piece fall into place. It was almost as if I could hear God whispering to me, "I see you, Charlotte. I see the sacrifices you make every day, even when no one around you does. No act of kindness you've done, no sequin you've sown, no cupcake you've baked is too small for me to notice and smile over. You are building a great cathedral, but you can't see right now what it will become." At times, my invisibility feels like an affliction, but it is not a disease that is erasing my life. It is the cure for my disease of my addiction to self and self-centeredness. It is the antidote to my strong, stubborn pride. I keep the right perspective when I see myself as a great builder, as one of the people who show up at a job that they will never see finished, to work on something that their name will never be on. The writer of the book went so far as to say that no cathedrals could ever be built in their lifetime because there are so few people willing to sacrifice to that degree. When I really think about it, I don't want my son to tell the friend he's bringing home from college for Thanksgiving, my mom gets up at 4 a.m. to hand baste the turkey and to make their homemade pies. That would mean I'd built a shrine or a monument to myself. I just want him to want to come home. And then, if there's anything more to say to his friend, to add, you're going to love it here. As mothers, we are building great cathedrals. We cannot see if we're doing it right, and one day it's very possible that the world will marvel not only at what we have built, but at the beauty that has been added to the world by the sacrifices of invisible mothers. That is a great article. There's a legend told, meaning it's not really true, it's made up, but a legend told of the sixth day of creation where God was fashioning Eve, and the angel came up to God and said, "You're sure taking a long time on this creation. What gives?" And God said, "Well, you ought to see the specification for this woman." "Oh, well, like what?" "Well, she has to be able to function in every situation. She has to be able to have a hug that will heal not only a skinned knee, but a broken heart. She has to be able to embrace many kids at one time with only two hands. And many times she will have to cure herself when she's sick and sometimes work 18 hours a day." Well, the angel was quite impressed with this. And he said, "Now, is this going to be the standard model for this creation?" And God said, "Yes." The angel looked down at the sleeping Eve, and he touched her. And he said, "Lord, she is very soft." And God said, "Well, she is soft, but she's also strong. And when she leans in on me, you will be amazed to see what she can do with her strength and what she can endure and sometimes overcome." Angel pondered and said, "Can she think?" "Oh, yes, she can think. And she can rational with anybody, and well as watch her negotiate." Angel thought again, and this time he reached down and he touched her cheek. And he said, "Lord, she's leaking." And God said, "That's a tear." Angel said, "What's a tear for?" "Well, tear is what she's going to use to express her grief, and sometimes to express her doubts. Sometimes to express her love, sometimes to express her loneliness, sometimes to express her suffering, and sometimes her pride in the ones that she raises." Made a big impression on the angel. He said, "Lord, I think you are a genius. I think you've thought of everything. She is indeed marvelous." And God said, "Indeed, she is marvelous. She will have the strength that amazes a man. She can handle any kind of trouble and hardship. She holds happiness, love, and hope in her hands and heart. She smiles when she feels like screaming. She laughs when she feels like crying. She cries when she's proud of her children. She laughs when she's not afraid." The angel said, "So, is this a perfect being?" And God shook his head and said, No. And then God thought for a moment. He said, "She has one drawback that I'm not going to fix. She will often forget her own worth." Well, these two stories that I've told are sort of the background for this message today, the invisible man. And there are 5 things that strike me about this. And it's a message directed for you moms, but also it's a message directed to the rest of us because it's reflective of the reality of life. The first point is Rome wasn't built in a day, and this comes from not just from my mother, but I know it's in history before that, but my mother would tell this to us all the time. Rome wasn't built in a day. And what she was saying is it takes a long time to do things that matter. Psalm 127 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards should stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." Now, what is the psalmist saying? If you're an engineer and you're going to build a great structure, you are not thinking about all the things that can go wrong. You think about your job and the blueprints and what's going to happen. But once those blueprints are done, now you've taken that project and given it to people who make the materials for that project, and for the supervisors of those projects and those who will build the projects. Watchman stays awake at night. He can stay in vain. There are many more people that can come and throttle people's safety than just one particular man watching over. Now, what's the point that the psalmist is saying here? There are many times in life where it seems to us that we can be competent to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. But what the psalmist says, though it may seem that way, there are many factors that can go haywire. And the wise person is the one who is relying on the Lord, even when things seem like you'll be able to manage them and put them together. Now, that's an important point. And he illustrates it in the three ways we've looked at in the first few verses. But the climax of the psalm is really directed at families, in particular, I think mothers. Verse 3, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. Now, the point that the psalmist is making here is that even when it feels like you are competent as a mother or competent as a father, competent as a parent, there are many other things that can happen that can derail you. Sometimes that happens in the terrible twos. Sometimes that happens in pre-adolescence. And what the psalmist is making the point is that we are foolish if we are not leaning in on the Lord to accomplish the raising of our children. Without that, what we inevitably do is we put pressure and stress upon ourselves to have to get it right. And sometimes, if you're not sure if it's right, you're going to feel worry and anxiety. And sometimes if your children or your husband blocks your goals to get it right, you are going to be angry at said children or said husband. Or sometimes if there's no way that you ever feel like you're ever going to get it right, you're going to feel depressed. All of these things what the psalmist says is that none of this has to happen. This is stress, pressure induced from having to have it together and not relying on the Lord. Rome wasn't built in a day. You and I are playing the long game with parenting. The second point, the small things are the big things. During my adult life, and for many of you, you have watched shows that we used to watch, and maybe some of you still do, but like I used to watch the Oscars every year, and I would fill out, I never knew all the things, but Best Picture and Act, used to know all that stuff. And now it just seems to me like just such a, I would much rather backwash my water pick on that night than watch the Oscars. Or the Emmys, or there was recently a big gala in New York and everybody dressed up in their $10,000 gowns and their tuxedos. But that's what the world splashes out there. It's notoriety, awards, self-congratulatory pats on the back and congratulations from other people. That's the world in which we live. And when you mothers think about tomorrow and making a lunch for your children, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and some chips and one of those little box drinks, it's hard to compare with what you see on the silver screen or on the big screen on your TV with all these awards and ceremonies. The question is, what metrics am I using to evaluate my life? And it's easy to be lulled into, my life is just so small and it's so little, and am I doing anything of importance? If the metric is fame and notoriety and having a blog that thousands of people look at and millions of followers on Instagram and all that stuff. Well, Jesus said, you are using the wrong metric. Luke 16:10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with a very little will be dishonest also in much. The metric that matters to God is small. How are you doing with the small things, the little things? And if those things are getting your attention and you're working to be faithful at those small things, God smiles. This is what matters. And then Jesus gives some illustrations. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will entrust to you with true riches? So he says, think about money. Let's say that it's your part about you have a job as a CPA or you're the bookkeeper at work. How are you doing with that? That's important. And what Jesus says is, if you are faithful in that, then I'm going to give you the true riches, which generally means people. People to shepherd or people to parent. Verse 12, if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And here what he's saying is, anybody can be generally faithful with what is in your self-interest. But the question is, can you be faithful with that which is in somebody else's self-interest? That's very unintuitive to us. And then verse 13, he comes to a conclusion. No one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, I'd like to make an application from this last verse as it relates to parenting, and this is a father illustration, not a mother illustration. When I was young, my father, who we loved, we just rarely saw at work. He was working he usually left the house about 7, would come home at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. We adored my dad. We just never saw him. And somewhere in high school, I thought, I don't want to do this. Someday I'm going to be a dad, and I want to be engaged with my kids and engaged in family life. I want to be at school functions, and I want to be driving to practices and going to games. And I don't want to do the way my dad did this. And so eventually got married, and we had children, and had our 3 kids, and I was able to do what I had talked or thought about back in high school for a lot of years, until my 2 older ones hit pre-adolescence. And I found myself getting angry with both of them over things that and a response that was over the top than what was warranted. And I remember going through a time of like, God, what's going on inside of me? Why am I getting so upset and angry about something so small or relatively small? And one of the things, it took about 2 months for me to see this, but one of the things I realized was that back when I was in high school, I had created a really good desire. And that is to be an engaged father. But somewhere along the line, I had taken a really good desire and had put a really bad twist on it. And my heart, without me knowing it, said, this is how you validate yourself. This is how you look yourself in the mirror and said, I'm a competent dad. Or people in the church will look at you and say, oh, Seth, he's a great dad. Or my wife, Mindy, would say, oh, I'm so thankful that he's our kid's father. Yeah, it's a great desire. But it's a terrible idea to attach your validation and importance to parenting. And I ran into this when my children weren't cooperating with that goal of thinking I was a very significant father. The third item here is service. The way down is the way up. During my lifetime, and this goes back a number of years, maybe 20 years or so, one of the things the feminist movement first started doing was to try to authenticate the value of women who have careers. But what took a hit was stay-at-home moms. And there was a time where if you were a stay-at-home mom, you were sort of sneered at by our culture as if you were sort of wasting your life, and you could be climbing the corporate ladder and really making a difference, for thousands and thousands of people. Well, since then, as sociologists have studied moms who are stay-at-home moms and working moms, that theory came up as, for the most part, mothers would rather stay home. And they would rather raise their children and be engaged with them. And for some of the mothers, they hate it that they have to be out of the home. That really should not be a surprise. Luke 17:7 reminds me of sort of the the thanklessness of being a mom. I remember my mom at different times saying, sort of in frustration when I was a knucklehead, which was many times, this is such a thankless job, you know. And I remember one time saying, Mom, I don't have any clean clothes. And I was a teenager. She said, well, Seth, you could learn how to do your own laundry. And I said to her, but Mom, that's your job. I'm lucky to still be alive. Sometimes, does anybody say thank you? Now, kids learn to say thank you if they're prompted. But you know, it's always amazing to me how much effort it takes to prompt a child to say thank you, even with forcing them or bribing them. Anyway, Jesus talks about a certain kind of attitude about life, and it's the life of a servant. Now, this relates to if you're a mother or a father, or if you're an employee, or if you're at home or in your neighborhood. Suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in the field, come along now, sit down and eat? That's a rhetorical question. Won't he rather say, prepare supper for me, get yourself ready, wait on me while I eat and drink. After that, you can eat and drink. Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? Again, another rhetorical question. No, the servant doesn't think like that. So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. Now, there's one word that strikes me from this passage that gets us in trouble, and that's our expectations. There's nothing wrong with desiring our children to thank us and for a husband to thank us for what we do. Those are good desires. Nothing wrong with that. But we take a good desire and we put a big twist on it, and we create an expectation. And the expectation has to do, they should say thank you, they should be appreciative, and the real culprit here is my need. My need. From God's point of view, what we need is what is illustrated in the first article we read. And the builder who's etching that little bird on a beam. God sees. And oftentimes, that needs to be enough. Whether you're a mom, whether you're a dad, whether you're an employee at work. Luke 17:12. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priest. As they went, these 10 lepers were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Now, when I think of that story, 9 out of 10 of these guys were cured of leprosy. Leprosy. This is not like, you know, Jesus handed out a few bucks and they could go buy lunch at McDonald's or something. Leprosy. And only one came back to utter the words, thank you. Now, if that's true with lepers, you can finish the rest of that sentence. Well, and then humility goes before honor. Again, our culture loves the limelight and loves to shine the light and sort of makes you feel like your life is insignificant if you're not in the limelight. You're not gracing magazine covers, and people don't know your name far and wide. Now, when I think about the limelight from Jesus' point of view, I think about we have 2 porch lights outside. And about once a year, I have to go out and unscrew the little glass globe and dump out all the dead moths that were attracted to their limelight. That's something of what is true about life. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like these other people, robbers, evildoers, slanderers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Two men. Very different prayers. And then Jesus says, I tell you, this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Parenting, mothering, fathering is a humbling job. But I think oftentimes it's God's laboratory for us to teach us humility. If for no other reason, because as our kids get older, you know, and I know, there are lots of times where they're going to need a tremendous amount of humility if they're going to build a marriage or build a career. If they're going to get through school well. Humility. And then finally, the last thing that strikes me, what's done in secret wins the gold. In Matthew 6:1, Jesus said, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And here, there is this value of secrecy from God's point of view, as opposed to doing something to elicit the praise of men or women. Something about secrecy here. Verse 2, when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Again, the value of secrecy. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they'll be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask them. There was a young mother, and she had her little kitties with her, and she approached a great gate. And ahead of her was a path that seemed to go on forever. And she could see mountains, and valleys, and hills, and streams. And she asked the man at the gate, is this the path to life? And the guide said, yes, it is. And she asked him, is this the long way? And he said, yes, it is. It's also the hard way. And the mother gulped, and she took her children in hand and walked through the gate. Just as she walked through the gate, the guide said, remember this, the end will be better than the beginning. The end will be better than the beginning. The mother found herself wading in a very shallow stream, barefoot. And her children, up to shin high, also frolicking in the stream, laughing and giggling. The sun shined on a warm, seemed like summer afternoon, and the birds were tweeting in the trees. She saw the flowers along the banks of the stream, and she thought to herself, does life get any better than this? Later, she found herself at nighttime, and a storm came in off the horizon. The path was dark, and the children were afraid and cold. And she gathered her children to herself, and she took her mantle off herself and wrapped up her children in the heat of her body weight, her body temperature, and the mantle. And the children looked up in the darkness at her and said, Mother, we are not afraid, for you are with us, and no harm will come. Well, a morning came, and they were off, and as they looked ahead, they could see a hill that continued to rise as far as they could see. It was a long climb for the children. And in the hot sun, they became quite weary, and the mother was weary with the climb as well. At different times, the children wanted to sit down, and she would have to repeatedly tell her children, "Oh, children, a little patience, and we will make it to the top of the hill. Oh, children, a little patience, and we will make it to the top of the hill." They finally did make it to the top of the hill, and they looked at Mother and said, "Mother, we would never made it to the top of the hill if you had not encouraged us." That night, as the mother looked up into the stars on a very dark night with millions of white stars flickering, her children asleep, she said, "This is a better day than the last, for my children have learned fortitude in the face of hardness." And then she said to God, "Yesterday I gave my children courage. Today I have given them strength." Well, they continued on their journey, and another day of strange clouds, very dark clouds, came. Clouds that were fearful. Clouds of war, clouds of evil, clouds of hatred. The children groped and stumbled in the dark, and Mother said, "Children, look up. Do you see the light? The light of the glory of God, the everlasting glory." And because of the light of that glory, the children were able to make their way ahead in spite of the overwhelming darkness around them. And at the end of the day, the mother said, "This is the best day of all. I have shown my children the face of God." Well, the days went on, and weeks, and months, and years. And Mother had grown very old and frail, bent over. But her children were tall and strong and walked with courage. And when the way was rough, they lifted her on their back and carried her. She was light as a feather. When they would come to a hill, they finally came to a hill and saw a different kind of hill, a shining hill, a shining road, and golden gates wide open. The mother told her children, "I have come to the end of my journey. And now I know the end is better than the beginning. For my children can walk alone with God, and their children after them." And the children turned to Mother and said, "Mother, you will always walk with us. You will always be in our memory, even when you walk through the gates." They stood. Mother gave them a kiss and turned and began to walk to her gate. The children stood on the hill and wept, and the gates finally closed behind Mother. And the children said, "We cannot see her, but she is still with us. A mother like her is more than a memory. She is a living presence." Your children will remember you when the trees rustle in the wind, or when they have a picnic for their own children, or when they go on vacation with their kids and it's a disaster. They will remember you in the hardness of life. They will remember you when their kids have their terrible twos or go through their rebellious teen years. You will always be a map for your children. Let's pray together. Father, what an amazing creature you have made. The feminine gender, wondrous in all of its ways. I pray that you would encourage every woman who's here today. Encourage her heart, whether she is presently a mother or not. I pray that you would wrap your arms around mothers today who are hurting, or mothers to be that can't be mothers who are hurting. or who have lost loved ones that are hurting. And I pray that you would steel each of the moms here for the long path ahead, the journey that never seems to end, of which she will always be engaged. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.